Hi 10th graders, welcome to your video on the short story Spider the Artist. Today we are going to be reading the short story together, answering some reading questions, and thinking about how this story fits into the genre of Afrofuturism. So remember in our last lesson we defined the genre of Afrofuturism, and today as we read I want you to think about how and why this story is a good example of Afrofuturism. So the first step is that you are going to open up your packet to the story Spider the Artist, and you're going to take a look at these two pictures. So these are illustrations that go along with the short story we're about to read. And the first question is going to be looking at the illustration on the left. What do you predict this story is about? So this is the picture you're looking at. I want you to make a prediction. What do you see, and what do you think the story might be about based on this picture? When you're done with that, you're going to be looking at the picture on the right. So this is a very different illustration, but it also connects to the story we're about to read. So make a prediction. What do you think this story is about based on this picture? All right, so you should be writing down your answers in your packet. Take a second to do that, and then we will move on to reading the story. So this short story is called Spider the Artist. The story is split up into 3 sections, and there are reading questions that go along with each section. So after we finish part 1, I'm going to pause, and you're going to answer the questions in your packet for part 1, and then we'll do the same thing for parts 2 and 3. So part 1, here's how the story begins. Zombie no go go unless you tell him to go. Zombie, zombie. Zombie no go stop unless you tell him to stop. Zombie no go turn unless you tell him to turn. Zombie. Zombie no go think unless you tell him to think. From Zombie by Fela Kuti, Nigerian musician and self-proclaimed voice of the voiceless. My husband used to beat me. That was how I ended up there that evening behind our house, just past the bushes, through the tall grass in front of the pipelines. Our small house was the last in the village, practically in the forest itself. So nobody ever saw or heard him beating me. Going out there was the best way to put space between me and him without sending him into further rage. When I went behind the house, he knew where I was and he knew I was alone. But he was too full of himself to realize I was thinking about killing myself. My husband was a drunk, like too many of the members of the Niger Delta People's Movement. It was how they all controlled their anger and feelings of helplessness. The fish, shrimps, and crayfish in the creeks were dying. Drinking the water shriveled women's wombs and eventually made men urinate blood. There was a stream where I had been fetching water. A flow station was built nearby, and now the stream was rank and filthy with an oily film that reflected rainbows. Cassava and yam farms yielded less and less each year. The air left your skin dirty and smelled like something preparing to die. In some places, it was always daytime because of the noisy gas flares. My village was shit. On top of all of this, People's Movement members were getting picked off like flies. The kill and go had grown bold. They shot People's Movement members in the streets. They ran them over, dragged them into the swamps. You never saw them again. I tried to give my husband some happiness, but after 3 years, my body continued to refuse him children. It's easy to see the root of his frustration and sadness, but pain is pain, and he dealt it to me regularly. My greatest, my only true possession was my father's guitar. It was made of fine polished Abura timber, and it had a lovely tortoiseshell pickguard. Excellent handwork. My father said that the timber used to create the guitar came from one of the last timber trees in the Delta. If you held it to your nose, you could believe this. The guitar was decades old and still smelled like fresh-cut wood, like it wanted to tell you its story because only it could. I wouldn't exist without my father's guitar. When he was a young man, he used to sit in front of the campground in the evening and play for everyone. People danced, clapped, shut their eyes, and listened. Cell phones would ring and people would ignore them. One day, it was my mother who stopped to listen. I used to stare at my father's fast, long-fingered hands when he played. Oh, the harmonies! He could weave anything with his music, rainbows, sunrises, spiderwebs, sparkling with morning dew. My older brothers weren't interested in learning how to play, but I was, so my father taught me everything he knew. And now it was my long fingers that graced the strings. I'd always been able to hear music, and my fingers moved even faster than my father's. I was good, really good. But I married that stupid man, Andrew, so I only played guitar behind the house, away from him. My guitar was my escape. That fateful evening, I was sitting on the ground in front of the fuel pipeline. It ran right through everyone's backyard. My village was an oil village, as was the village where I grew up. My mother lived in a smaller village before she was married, as did her mother. We are pipeline people. My mother's grandmother was known for lying on the pipeline running through her village. She'd stay like that for hours, listening and wondering what magical fluids were running through the large, never-ending steel tubes. This was before the zombies, of course. I laughed. If she tried to lie on a pipeline now, she'd be brutally killed. Anyway, when I was feeling especially blue, I'd take my guitar and come out here and sit right in front of the pipeline. I knew I was flirting with death by being so close, but when I was like this, I really didn't care. I actually welcomed the possibility of being done with life. It was a wonder that my husband didn't smash my guitar during one of his drunken rages. I'd surely have quickly thrown myself on the pipeline if he did. Maybe that was why he'd rather smash my nose than my guitar. This day, he'd only slapped me hard across the face. I had no idea why. He'd simply come in, seen me in the kitchen, and smack. Maybe he'd had a bad day at work. He worked very hard at a local restaurant. Maybe one of his women had scorned him. Maybe I did something wrong. I didn't know. I didn't care. My nose had just started to stop bleeding, and I was not seeing so many stars. My feet were only inches from the pipeline. I was especially daring this night. It was warmer and more humid than normal. Or maybe it was my stinging, burning face. The mosquitoes didn't even bother me much. In the distance, I could see Neka, a woman who barely spoke to me, giving her small sons a bath in a large tub. Some men were playing cards at a table several houses down. It was dark. There were small trees and bushes here, and even our closest neighbor was not very close, so I was hidden. I sighed and placed my hands on the guitar strings. I plucked out a tune my father used to play. I sighed and closed my eyes. I would always miss my father. The feel of the strings vibrating under my fingers was exquisite. I fell deep into the zone of my music, weaving it, then floating on a glorious sunset that lit the palm tree tops, and click! I froze. My hands still on the strings, the vibration dying. I didn't dare move. I kept my eyes closed. The side of my face throbbed. Click! This time the sound was closer. Click! Closer. Click! Closer. My heart pounded, and I felt nauseous with fear. Despite my risk-taking, I knew this was not the way I wanted to die. Who would want to be torn limb from limb by zombies? As everyone in my village did multiple times a day, I quietly cursed the Nigerian government. Twing! The vibration of the guitar string was stifled by my middle finger still pressing it down. My hands started to shake, but still I kept my eyes shut. Something sharp and cool lifted my finger. I wanted to scream. The string was plucked again. Twang! The sound was deeper and fuller, my finger no longer muffling the vibration. Very slowly, I opened my eyes. My heart skipped. The thing stood about 3 feet tall, which meant I was eye to eye with it. I'd never seen one up close. Few people have. These things are always running up and down the pipeline like a herd of super-fast steer, always with things to do. I chanced a better look. It really did have 8 legs. Even in the darkness, those legs shined, catching even the dimmest light. A bit more light, and I'd have been able to see my face perfectly reflected back at me. I'd heard that they polished and maintained themselves. This made even more sense now. But who would have time to keep things looking so immaculate? The government came up with the idea to create the zombies, and Shell, Chevron, and a few other oil companies, who were just as desperate, supplied the money to pay for all of it. The zombies were made to combat pipeline bunkering and terrorism. It makes me laugh. The government and the oil people destroyed our land and dug up our oil. Then they created robots to keep us from taking it back. They were originally called Anasi Droids 419, but we call them Oyibo Contraption, and most often Zombie, the same name we call those kill-and-go soldiers who come in here harassing us every time something bites their brains. It's said that zombies can think. Artificial intelligence, this is called. I have had some schooling, a year or two of university, but my area was not in the sciences. No matter my education, as soon as I got married and brought to this damn place, I became like every other woman here, a simple village woman living in the Delta region where zombies kill anyone who touches the pipeline and whose husband knocks her around every so often. What did I know about zombie intellect? It looked like a giant, shiny metal spider. It moved like one too. All smooth, shifting joints and legs, it crept closer and leaned in to inspect my guitar strings some more. As it did so, two of its back legs tapped on the metal of the pipeline. Click, click, click. It pushed my thumb down on the string and plucked the string twice, making a muted pluck. It looked at me with its many blue, shining round eyes. Up close, I could see that they weren't lights. They were balls of a glowing metallic blue, undulating liquid, like charged mercury. I stared into them fascinated. No one else in my village could possibly know this fact. No one had gotten close enough. Eyes of glowing bright blue liquid metal, I thought. Nawa. It pressed my hand harder and I gasped, blinking and looking away from its hypnotic eyes. Then I understood. You want me to play? It sat there waiting, placing a leg on the body of my guitar with a soft tap. It had been a long time since anyone had wanted me to play for him. I played my favorite high life song, Love de Sea Road by Oliver de Coke. I played like my life depended on it. The zombie didn't move, its legs remaining pressed to my guitar. Was it listening? I was sure it was. 20 minutes later, when I stopped finally playing, sweat running down my face, it touched the tips of my aching hands. Gently. All right, so that is the end of part 1 of our story. So now I want you to flip a couple pages in your packet to where the reading questions are for Spider the Artist. There are going to be a couple reading questions for you to answer about part 1. If you're stuck on any of the questions, you should go back in the video, go back in the story to reread and find the answer. Also, feel free to talk to your classmates around you about the answers that they are coming up with.